Hello, my name is Robert Goodwin, and this is Law on the Line. I would like to welcome Robert Zaleski, Bob, to the show this evening. And Robert is, and Bob is a partner in the firm of Paone, Zaleski, and Murphy. And it has offices in Woodbridge, New Jersey, and Red Bank. And Bob, your office is in Woodbridge.
I'm in Woodbridge, yes.
Yes. And your firm is limited really to the area of all aspects of family law except prenuptial agreements. And you told me that, and that will be a subject of another show.
That's right.
Okay.
That's another day.
Another day. Anyway, Bob, we're here today to discuss quadros, or qualified domestic relations orders.
Right.
And you volunteered this very difficult subject.
Well, I did because I was running out of topics, I mean, I didn't know what I was going to do this time around, so I took this one on, and it's a little technical, and maybe it's not the most exciting of topics. It's not murder, it's not, anything sexy like that, but it's something that people who are getting divorced need to know.
Okay, so let's start off with, and I have your magic list here, but seriously, what is a quadro, and why would I want to get one?
Well, as you said, a quadro, it's an acronym. It means a Qualified Domestic Relations Order. And why would you want to get one? Well, nobody wants to get a quadro, because if you're getting one, it probably means that you're also getting a divorce.
Okay.
I had a case recently where somebody said to me, we want to get a quadro entered, but we aren't getting divorced right now. And I said, well, why not if your marriage is over? And they said, well, of course, we're on the same insurance policy, right? And we don't want to lose that. So we don't want to lose the insurance coverage, but at the same time, we don't want to stay married, and we don't want to get divorced, and we don't want to file the complaint, because if you file a complaint for divorce, you get divorced, you lose your insurance coverage. So they said, is there some way that we can still get a quadro entered and split up our retirement benefits? And I looked into it, and the answer, surprisingly to me, was yes, you can do that.
Well, that's news to me. Now tell me about that.
That's right. Most people don't know that. What I discovered was that there's no prohibition about having a quadro entered, despite the fact that there's no divorce entered. What you need to do, though, is you need to get a docket number, because a quadro is an order, and without a docket number, you can't get an order entered. So the way
an order from the court, of course.
An order from the court, right. So what we determined we would do to get around that was we had the parties agree that they were going to file a divorce from bed and board, which is another kind of complaint that doesn't lead to a final judgment of divorce. And they were going to agree that after it was filed and we got a docket number and we applied for the quadro, that they would dismiss the complaint for divorce from bed and board, and they would have their quadro, and they would still be married, and they would still have their insurance.
Pretty ingenious. Now tell me, what does the quadro do with respect to the retirement assets that each of them or both of them have obtained during the marriage?
Well, when you get divorced, it's a process of dividing your assets between the parties. And
equitable distribution.
Equitable distribution of assets. And, many people think that means that it's automatically 50-50. It's not automatically 50-50, but there's sort of a presumption that it's going to start out 50-50 unless there's a good reason why it's something else. So each person is going to get a distributive share or a share of the retirement assets. And the question is, how do we release them to the parties? How do we transfer them to the parties without creating what's called a taxable event, or incurring any penalties? Because let's say you're getting divorced, you're 45 years old, so you're really too young at this point in time to claim your retirement. And if you go in and you say, well, I want to take the money out of my account, you're going to find out that you're going to get hit with a penalty for being premature withdrawal of the funds. And you're also going to have those funds that are taken out treated as income. And people ask, why is it treated as income? Well, because when you put money into a retirement account, the whole idea is that you're doing it on a tax-deferred basis. So 100% of the money that you put, it comes out of your paycheck, goes in the account, and you don't pay any taxes on it. And then someday when you're old and you retire, you don't have a job anymore, and your income is lower and your tax bracket is lower, then you take the money out and you say, go ahead and tax me on it because I'm at a much lower tax rate. So if you were to try to transfer, let's say you're getting divorced, and I know you're not getting divorced, but
Thank you.
if you were getting divorced from your wife and she said, well, now I want you to transfer over to me my share of, let's say, your 401k account. If you were to just take the money out of the account, transfer it to her without a quadro, later you're going to get a bill or you're going to get a 1099 in the bill that says you took money out of your retirement account. This is income to you and you got to pay taxes on it. So you get a quadro to avoid being responsible for that transaction, and now you've got a tax-free distribution which you can transfer to her.
And no penalty depending upon your age.
Well, here's the other thing. If you take it out when we're too young, you can get hit with a penalty. But let's say that you want to transfer the money to her and the quadro says, well, this money isn't going into your pocket, you're not taking it out because you want to violate the rules. You're taking it out to transfer her. Now, there's no penalty.
Okay. Now, you mentioned retirement plans, and you were talking about where they're tax deductible, and and at the end, you're going to pay the taxes. I know. How does it impact a Roth IRA, where you pay income tax, but not on the back end, I believe?
Yeah, well, a Roth is a little different animal than a regular 401k. Normally, a 401k is what they refer to as a kind of defined contribution plan. So in other words, you're putting money in, and you can kind of look at it like as a savings account. I always think of them as a retirement savings account. Say we had an individual retirement account is a retirement savings account. So it's not that hard to figure out how much you've got and how much you have to transfer to your wife. So it's a rather simple transaction. But it gets a little more difficult if you have a retirement asset like a pension. Because a pension, number one, if you look at your pension statement, if they ever send you a pension statement, it's not going to say, well, your pension is worth $500,000. It's not going to give you any idea what it's worth. All you're going to know from contacting your pension is that someday when you retire, based on your length of service and your average income over the last several years of your employment, we're going to figure out how much money you get, and you're going to get a check every month for the rest of your life. So it's not nice and clean like it is with a 401k or a Roth 401k where you know how much money is in there. So if that occurs, then you have to get a quadro entered, and the quadro is going to be an order that goes into the file of what's called the plan administrator. So the person who's running your pension plan gets this order after you have it entered, and it says, this is how much that, in your case, your wife is entitled to from your pension payments. Now, if you and your wife were married the entire time that you were accruing that pension, the likelihood is that she would then get 50% of your checks. So if you're getting a check for $10,000 every month from your pension, $5,000 goes to Bob, $5,000 goes to Kathy. But in the alternative, if you were married to her for 20 years, but you were only in that pension plan for 10, or let's say you're married for 20 years, 10 of those years were premarital that you were in the pension. So you're earning 10 years worth of pension benefits before you even marry her. So now they're going to have to look at it and say some percentage of that payment, that monthly payment, will go to her and some percentage to you, but you'll get a bigger percentage because some of the pension was earned when you weren't married.
And what happens if I continue to work and accrue benefits post the complaint for divorce? What happens to that portion of the pension, if you will? Is that subject to the quadro?
Well, the answer is it works the same way as it does with a premarital component. So if you were in the pension before you married her, then you were in a pension for 10 years while you were married, and then you work another 10 years after you file your complaint, and so you have a total of 30 years. In our scenario that we're talking about,
right,
only 10 of those years are going to be marital years. So if you continue working, you're going to get the benefit of that additional increase in your pension benefit that you accrued after the date of the complaint. So in our example, a third of the pension is marital, she'd get a half of a third, so she'd get a sixth of your pension payment.
And a sixth of what? Of my total pension plan payment, including the incremental increases that have occurred to the pension after the divorce itself?
Well, the way that they usually do it is, using something that's called the Marks formula.
And explain that to our audience
Yeah,
and break it down.
Yes, this is not going to be very exciting, folks,
know.
but I'm going to give it to you anyway, whether you like it or not. Marx is really a case that talks about the fact that you have to create what's called a coverture fraction, which means you look at the total years that you're in the pension, and then you look at how many of those years are marital, and you get a fraction, and you apply that to the benefit. Now, is it an exact amount that you should get? No, because you might have put more or accrued more benefits early in the marriage rather than late in the marriage. There's a lot of reasons why it might not be exactly right, but they apply that Marx formula, and the spouse gets her percentage based on that formula. So it's not 100%.
But, and so at the end result, if I retired after my 30 years and my wife was, we were married for 10 of those 30 years.
Right.
And 10 years I had premarital, 10 years postmarital. And as we said before, you know, she's entitled to get that 10 years and half of that 10 years or whatever that percentage might be.
Right.
Does that include, though, that her percentage, the amount, the value of the pension upon my retirement?
Well, it's not going to be like a defined contribution plan where they're looking at a lump sum amount. They're looking at what the monthly benefit is at the
Correct.
end. And usually what they do is they just apply that coverture fraction to the amount of that benefit.
Gotcha, to the monthly benefit.
Right.
Okay. So I am not contributing to money to my ex-spouse that's coming out of my pocket. Is that fair to say?
Well, that's right. And also, if you're earning money after you file your complaint for divorce, you don't have to share that with her. So, you know, you don't have to say, oh, I'm going to quit my job tomorrow because I don't want to share my increased pension with my wife. You can take comfort in knowing that what you earn after the complaints file will belong to you.
Okay. So the Quadro, we talked about the distinction perhaps between a defined benefit plan such as a traditional pension and a defined contribution plan. Am I getting this correct?
Yes, the defined benefit plan is like a pension,
Right.
and a defined contribution account is more like a savings account. So that's
Okay.
like a 401k or an IRA.
All right. Now, defined, let's talk about public employees, because I know that quadros don't necessarily apply in that terminology. What's the distinction between a public employment and pension, whether in the state, let's use the state of New Jersey. We have public employment retirement system, we have police and fire, and we also have the TPAF, I believe, Teachers Pension Annuity Fund. How do they work? In general, how do they get distributed?
Well, you have problems sometimes when you have accounts which are not qualified accounts. So if you have a government pension, a military pension,
Okay.
any non-qualified plan, it isn't covered by what's called ERISA. So, for instance, if let's say you're married to a police officer.
Correct.
And it turns out that you're getting divorced, and you say, well, I want to get a quadro entered. You're not going to be able to do it because a quadro doesn't apply to a police and fire pension. So what are the problems that arise from that? Well, if let's say it's the husband who's the police officer, and he's collecting a pension, and he dies, all right? He goes into pay status, and then he dies, and you say, oh, I only got 2 checks. That's all I get? Well, that isn't right, because you know, if you had a quadro in place, there would be an order that says you're going to continue to receive your share. And the reason for that is because under a quadro, you could be assigned what's called a separate benefit, all right? Which means that they kind of took his pension and they broke it in half and says, here's your half, and you can do what you want with yours.
And you'll get that until perhaps you die, or
That's
maybe
right.
even could go to your survivors if the plan allows for it.
Correct.
Okay, so what happens with the police and firemen, for example?
Well, in an example like that, you have what's called a shared interest if you're the spouse. The participant has the pension, and you have a shared interest. So you get to sort of piggyback on what he gets, but you don't have your own interest. And so if he were to die, your share could end. Now, some pensions provide for what's called survivor benefits. So when you're going to check or to select your options, you know, you have to make a decision what kind of benefit you want to leave to your spouse. Now, obviously, if you say, well, in the event of my death, I want my spouse to get 100% of what I was getting. Well, it's going to cost you if you want to do that. Now, if you say, if I die, you can give her 50% of what I was receiving. That's going to impact the amount of the monthly benefit that you receive. So if you're a gambler and you say, well, I don't think I'm going to live very long, I want all my money now. So what you'd like to do is choose the option that costs the least so you can get the most money. So you might say, I don't want to really leave her anything, but if I'm going to give her anything, I'll give her a 50% option. Whereas if you gave her a 100% option, it would be more expensive to you. So now she's got some protection because she's got the survivor benefit. But some plans don't offer survivor benefits. And if they don't, then what you really have to do is you have to talk to the spouse who was the participant about maintaining life insurance that would secure that obligation in the event of death.
We talked about life insurance, and sometimes if you're of a certain age, maybe 55 or 60 even, and you're still working and you're a public employee, getting life insurance to secure that benefit may be very costly.
Yeah, it's a real problem because if somebody's 25 years old, sure, they'll sell you a life insurance policy, but you go in there and you're 65 already, you have a medical condition, you say, oh, I need to secure my my pension payments to my wife. Good luck, it's going to be very expensive.
We just referred to the police and firemen. Is there a distinction between it and TPAF, teachers' pension, and the public employment retirement system in terms of retirement benefits and survivorship?
Yeah, different pension plans, even that are run through the state, have different requirements and different terms, and some are more stringent than others. So you really have to check with your plan and see what it is they do provide or they don't, because many of them are different.
Right. If I am a police officer, for example, and this is an acrimonious divorce, and I know, based upon the plan, that there are no survivor benefits. Now, and you are the attorney for the other spouse, for example, in our hypothetical, the wife. What do you do in terms of your strategy as a divorce attorney to get the other side to say, look, we need to have an election for a survivor benefit. If one is assuming, I believe with the police, you can elect that, but or can you not?
Well, if a survivor benefit is available, you can be required to select it. But you can't, for instance, force a police officer to name you as the recipient of the pension because you're an ex-spouse. So if he remarries and he wants to name somebody else, you don't have any authority to require him to do it. So it's difficult. So sometimes what you might want to consider doing, if there's enough funds available, is to say, you know what, I don't want my interest in your pension. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to buy me out of the pension. And what we're going to do is we're going to get your pension evaluated. We're going to figure out how much it's worth. And then you're going to tell me how much I have to pay you, and you can keep the pension, and the police officer will pay you enough money to buy you out of the pension. That way you don't care if he lives or dies.
Now explain that, because on the one hand you said they're very, whether it be a defined benefit plan, a typical pension, or a non-qualified plan such as a pension through the police or teachers, how do you know, how do they figure out what the present value of that is so you can say to a spouse, here, I'll pay you X dollars to buy out your interest? How does that work? And who do you use if it is?
It's a good question, and as I said earlier, most of the time when you get a pension statement, if they're kind enough to send you one, every year or two, it isn't going to tell you what it's worth because you're not actually putting savings into it. It's going to be, your benefit is going to be determined at a later date when you go to retire. So since there's no value placed on it, you would have to hire a firm, an actuary, who would come in and do an evaluation and say, for purposes of your divorce, this pension is worth so many dollars. So if they come and say to you, it's worth, $600,000, you could say, all right, 600 grand, give me 300, half of the value, or give me, my half in cash, and then I'll waive my interest in your pension.
And these firms are able to figure that out based upon formulas that they have developed? Because you said it's a shared interest. So how do they determine what your share is?
They are actuaries and they have their magic, but they use calculations which are based on mortality tables, how long you're going to live.
And your income.
And your income and how many years you've been with the pension system. So they could come back and they could say, as far as we're concerned, this is the dollar figure that it's worth. Now, you have to be careful because when people get retirement dollars, as we discussed earlier, they're untaxed dollars, right? So you get them, now you have to pay taxes on them. So if you were to get $1 million, maybe it's only worth $800,000 because you're paying 20% in taxes. So if I say to you, I'd like to offset your pension of $1 million against a savings account in a bank that's worth $1 million, your answer should be no if you're the police officer, because you're going to say, you know what, if I got to pay taxes on it, it's not worth $1 million, it's worth 800,000. So you have to keep in mind that there are tax consequences.
So now that we've confused everybody, including my notes, so does it matter, I'm looking at your question, number 6, does it matter how old you are when you withdraw money from a retirement account?
Well, it does. If you have an IRA account, for example, if you're less than 59 and a half years old, you can be subject to a penalty. So you want to wait until after that. Now, if you want to avoid paying the penalty for the early withdrawal, that's why you get a quadro normally. Now, with an IRA, there are no quadros. It's a special animal. It's not a ERISA plan.
An IRA.
The IRA account, right. But with an IRA, all you need is just a regular order from the court, and there's usually a form that you can fill out, so you can do what's called a tax-free rollover. So if your IRA has $100,000 in it, and if you roll over 50 tax-free to your spouse, now you don't have to worry about the taxes, because when she finally takes it, she'll pay the taxes on it. It's not going to come out of your share.
But if it comes by way of a rollover and it goes into another account similar to an IRA,
right,
there would be no tax effect on that. They would go tax-free, wouldn't it? The transfer incidental to a divorce?
If it's a transfer incidental to a divorce and you transfer it by way of a tax-free rollover, she'll receive, let's say, 50% of what's in your IRA, but then it's going to go into her IRA
right,
account.
Exactly.
And
so
she's going to pay the taxes when she takes it.
When she takes it, but not at the time of transfer.
Not at the time of transfer.
So that's the key. People have to understand that. Now, does that work similarly with 401ks?
It's pretty much the same process with a 401k. They're both retirement savings accounts, and they both can be, rolled over. Well, they don't call it a rollover necessarily with a 401k, but it can be transferred to the wife in a tax-free manner, whereby she receives it, puts it into a retirement account of her own. That way the government gets their share when she takes her money.
Okay. You're representing a party who has $250,000 in their IRA. We'll make it simple. And the other side has $100,000 in the IRA.
Right.
And what's the easiest and best way to equalize those? And assuming it's all marital, we won't get into even if it were non-marital contributions, we could exclude those by looking at the date of the marriage, right? Anything before that?
Yes, or after.
And just a question on that. Who determines what the value is as of the date of the marriage? An old statement, or how does that work?
It's a very good question. A lot of times you aren't going to be able to tell exactly what the balance was, because the bank's going to say, we only keep records for 7 years. We don't know what you had in 1992 or something like that. And that's why if you use a coverture fraction, you're just saying, look, it doesn't matter exactly how much was in there premarital. We're not going to cleave that off. We're going to look at the entire length of your retirement asset, how many of those years or months were marital, and give you a percentage of what's in there.
Okay. So now I have, I think I said 100, you have 200. How do we go about distributing those?
Well, probably the smartest thing that you can do is, because I say this, and I love the people who prepare quadros, by the way. There's some really nice people out there, Judy Dier and Bill Troyan and his son Rodney. They're wonderful, all wonderful to work with, and they run companies that create these quadros for you. But if you go to them, you still have to pay a cost for each quadro that's prepared.
Correct.
So if you had, let's say you both have 10 retirement accounts, all right?
Oh, which is possible. Not 10 perhaps, but yeah,
but maybe 3 or 4, right?
Right, exactly.
It would probably be smarter to figure out what the total is and what the difference is and say, I'm going to make one rollover to you to equalize the values in these accounts. And once it's done, you only pay for one Quadro instead of paying for 6.
And do you find in your experience as a family law attorney that most attorneys are amenable to doing that? Or have you ever run into where people aren't, and they say, you Quadro yours, I'll Quadro hit, the other, and and you pay double, and we only have 3 minutes left, Bob.
Well, the attorney doesn't necessarily get paid double because the company who's preparing the Quadro is the one that's getting paid, not the attorney.
That is true.
You may prepare Quadros because you're a very cerebral kind of guy and you know how to do things like that.
Thank you.
But me, I don't prepare Quadros because I'm afraid that, number one, I won't do it as well as one of these firms, and number two, I don't want somebody to sue me because I did it incorrectly. So the only one who's going to get rich by preparing more Quadros is going to be the company that's preparing them.
And I follow your advice on that. I try to stay away from preparing Quadros because it's a specialty that I don't have.
Right.
But the idea is to minimize the number of Quadros, do the rollovers, if you will, do the offsets, and so that you just have one Quadro.
Yeah, if you can, that would be the smartest thing to do.
Yeah, okay, I think we asked this before, but I'll look at your question 8, and it says, if my spouse continues working after our divorce, and this increases the value of their pension benefits, do I get 50% of their monthly pension checks when they retire?
Well, the answer is probably not 50% because your spouse has continued working after the date of the complaint, so some portion of that retirement asset is exempt from distribution. So your percentage of the pension checks when they roll in will be maybe 40% instead of 50%.
Okay. In that same vein, question number 9. Number 9. So they accept a portion of what if I agree to accept a portion of my spouse's monthly retirement benefits following their retirement, but they die? They die before me. Do my payments continue?
Well, the question is a good one, and it depends on what kind of a plan you're in. If you've chosen a survivor option, it might say that you continue to receive your payments even though the spouse is dead. Or it might say you continue to receive 50% of what the spouse was getting. It depends on what you select.
But that requires also the agreement of the other side because they're going to get less in their pension if they have survivor benefits. Is that correct?
That's correct. So, if they're saying, I want the money now, a lot of it depends on your health. I mean, you say, well, do I want it all up front or do I want it to last for the rest of my life? So if you think you're going to live for a long time, you might say, I'm happy with taking the payments for as long as possible. But if you're sickly, you might say, give it all to me now because I'm not going to be around.
But and if there are no survivor benefits, you mentioned before, life insurance may be the only option.
Right. And
if you can get it.
If you're sick, that's not going to be a good option.
And you mentioned a couple of companies, and we're going to close on this. What is the procedure for having a Quadro proposed and entered? You're recommending that litigants retain a company that prepares these?
I would. I think the first step is you have to agree on what you're going to be doing with your pension benefits or retirement benefits. Once you do that, you create a written agreement called a matrimonial settlement agreement. Then you send a copy of it to one of these companies and you say, this is what our agreement says. I want you to put it into an order. They create the order that's going to do that effectively. Then they have a nice service where they send it to the plan administrator for pre-approval and they tell you whether or not it's going to be approved. And if they say it's going to be approved, then you take it, you finalize the order, you send it to a judge, you get it signed, you get it filed, and off you go.
And you send it back to the plan and then they implement it.
That's right. They put it in the file and they say, when this guy retires, we know how much to give to his wife.
And they do. And they honor these.
They do. They honor them. They have to.
Well, Robert, we are wrapping up. And everything that you wanted to know about Quadros in 30 minutes.
And a lot more than you ever wanted to know about Quadros.
Probably true, but it's very important. Thanks, Bob. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Bob. I always enjoy being here.
I love having you as a guest. Wonderful. Thank you.